welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we are talking about Presence, the new Steven Soderbergh film. It is a ghost story, and we'll get into a lot of spoilers on this one. We always get into spoilers, but I feel like it's especially pertinent to mention spoiler alert on really any movie about a ghost story, because there's always twists and turns and things that you need to find out by watching the movie, and you should watch the movie because it's a good one. Joining me to talk about it is Josh Bell from Awesome Movie Year, returning. He's been on a bunch of the bonus episodes lately, the top 10s and things like that, but happy to have him back on a regular episode. We're getting lots of great puzzle pieces, so that's coming up here in a second. Before we get to it, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media at PiecingPod, and don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. And with that said, let's get into Presence. All right, a ghostly presence is with me named Josh Bell. We're going to talk about Presence. How's it going, Josh?
It's good. We're going to have this whole podcast from my perspective and just quietly observe your activities, I think.
Yeah, that sounds scary, actually.
It does.
Yeah. So
Easy for me, though.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking about this before we jumped on this call here to record this episode. So I started piecing it together in 2018, and I have not covered a Steven Soderbergh film yet. And he's released 8 movies since then, I think. 7 or 8 movies. That's kind of insane.
Yeah, he's very prolific. I'm surprised you haven't gotten to any of his films and that this is the first one. Not that this isn't a good film, but
Yeah.
it is an odd choice.
Absolutely. And I mean, I have nothing against Steven Soderbergh. He's good. I like plenty of his movies, but yeah, it's never happened. So I'm happy to get a chance to talk about him today. And I like this movie quite a bit. I think we'll get into a lot of interesting stuff here with this one. This came out at Sundance last year, right? This is like over a year in just the waiting, right?
Yeah, Neon picked it up, I think, right away, but for whatever reason decided to hold off on releasing it. I don't know why they didn't want to release it at Halloween. Maybe they were releasing too many other horror movies last year. They had Immaculate and they had Long Legs, and I feel like they might have even had one other kind of heavily hyped horror movie, which has become a bit of a niche for them, these indie horror films. So they decided that this was the window for it. And
Sure.
It certainly hasn't become the sensation of those other films. Not that you would expect it to. Watching this movie, you can't imagine. Or at least I couldn't imagine.
Sure.
It would become like that.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, as much as I did like this movie, I think marketing it as a horror movie, would have backfired at any time, because it's kind of not, even though it's very chilling, and it certainly is a ghost story, and we'll talk about that. But horror, I don't know if we could really call it that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have been marketing it that way, not in the same way as like Long Legs, where it's like, oh, this will terrify you, but that it is a haunted house movie in the vein of other haunted house movies. And I feel like there's probably a not small number of people who've gone to see it expecting that and thought, what the hell is this?
Yeah, fair. I wouldn't blame them for thinking that, but it's a good movie though, and they should stick it out. But let's start getting into some puzzle pieces here, Josh. What do you have for your first piece?
Well, I'm going to start with a movie, as we say on here often, that I'm sure did not influence this film because it was probably in production at a similar period, but has a very similar approach to horror storytelling, and that's In a Violent Nature. This is a haunted house movie that is taking the perspective of the ghost or the presence, whatever exactly it is, and is using the literal point of view of the ghost as the camera. And In a Violent Nature doesn't do that. I mean, we see the character, but it's still a similar kind of take just on the slasher movie genre, where we are following the Jason Voorhees like killer the whole time. And I think one of the big similarities is, just like in that movie, you don't really get what we would usually think of as the main plot. Like the human characters, the normal person characters, you just kind of get parts of their conversations when the POV character, whether that's the slasher killer here, there, or the ghost here, kind of is in their vicinity. You get
Sure.
even less of that in A Violent Nature, where most of the time that killer is kind of trudging through the woods on his own, and you're getting the kind of Dardenne brothers like follow shot, which is not, again, an actual POV, but is very similar. So, I mean, I think in both ways, they're movies that aren't scary, but have elements of horror and are really interested in, like, what if we took this character, or this, sometimes it's not even really a character, just like this plot device,
Sure. Sure.
and that we take for granted in horror movies, and thought about what is it like for them during
Yeah.
this period. So again, I don't know if they were exactly at the same time, but maybe a similar instinct, in that we've had
Right.
so many movies like this, and now these filmmakers are thinking like, well, what if we approach it this way? And I think it's a similar perspective.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And even though, probably not like an actual influence, it's certainly the idea of the thing kind of comes from the same place of seeing the other side of what we've seen so many times before. And so I think it comes from a similar place. And it's funny, I still haven't seen In a Violent Nature, but I
Oh,
feel like
okay.
I've seen it because everybody talks about it and it sounds like it's this one thing the whole time. So I have a feeling get the gist of it, but I'm going to watch it one of these days.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I feel like I probably had the same perspective on both of those movies, which is like, it's an interesting experiment that I was glad that I watched. I don't know if it all held together as like a story,
yeah.
but I appreciate the attempt to offer that alternative perspective.
Absolutely. Well, I will go for my first one to A Ghost Story, the David Lowery film, which is another, unique and beautiful and sometimes slow take on a ghost story. And in this one, Casey Affleck stars as this guy who has passed on but doesn't quite know what to do with himself. He doesn't know why he's still here, and trying to figure that out and figure out like the meaninglessness of this afterlife for himself. And he can't communicate with anybody. He doesn't know what's happening time wise. And so that kind of plays a part in both movies, really, for both of these characters, in not knowing why they're actually stuck in this house at any point. And I think both movies kind of deal with a unique take on ghost stories, and something that's a little different from what you would usually expect. Like we were just saying, within A Violent Nature, it's a story that we've seen so many times before from the usual perspective, and now we're kind of telling it from a different kind of perspective and focusing on a different experience, the experience of that ghost. And I think David Lowery did it great in A Ghost Story. Another movie that kind of maybe tests the audience patience at times, but I think is also really great.
Yeah, I had this on my list, and I love that movie. I mean, it was in my top 10, close to the top, I think, the year that that came out, and is
Yeah,
just so brilliant. And I mean, I think what's better maybe about that movie is because you have the first part, the early part, where Casey Affleck is there, and you have a sense of who he is as a person and what he cares about. And even though he ends up under that sheet for the rest of the movie, and you don't see him, and he doesn't get to speak, and you still have an understanding of what this character cares about.
yeah.
And I think there's a more emotional investment, whereas in Presence, you don't know that. And even at the end, maybe you do. I'm not entirely sure how it's meant to. I don't know if we want to, get
I was
into
just
all
gonna
that,
say
but
we should probably spoil. I mean, we always spoil on this show, so spoiler alert, everybody. You should know that by now if you listen to Piecing It Together. But yeah, I mean, the presence is it's supposed to be Tyler, the son, who is in a kind of weird timeline of his own as a ghost versus in the regular life.
yeah, I mean, I kind of got that, because there is a moment where the like medium or whatever that they hire to come to the house says that the ghost might be in an anachronistic
Yeah,
place or whatever. But I feel like the moment where you might understand that that's the case is at the very, very, very end, when
sure.
Lucy Liu, as the mother, sees his face in the mirror. And then the movie is basically over at
Yeah,
that point. And so there's not really any impact, I feel like, because especially it's so quick too, you might think, wait, what was that? How was that? And then
yeah.
later on, you can reflect on it and think, oh, okay, that was how it was. I wasn't even 100% sure if that was
I
what it was
wasn't.
meant to be.
Yeah, me neither. Me neither. And it's really such a great moment but at the same time, it's very unclear, I would say. But like, it kind of was like washing over me, and then you start seeing other people talking about it, and it kind of becomes more clear. But they certainly do lay some breadcrumbs along the way, and that kind of nails it down. But yeah, it's very interesting the way they did it by putting it right at the end. So it's like, okay, we're walking out of the theater and we're still maybe not 100% sure, you know?
Right. And so I feel like that doesn't have the same emotional engagement that you can get in a ghost story where we know it's Casey Affleck and we saw him and how much he cared about his wife and all of that. We know what's important to him. And what's so, I think, affecting in that movie is that we know what's important to him and he knows what's important to him, but he can't convey it
Sure.
to the other characters, to Rooney Mara or whoever else is there in the house. And I feel like there's so much. I mean, that movie also ends on a kind of very abrupt note, like a literal note, right? He finds
Sure.
this note, and it's that moment for him that finally sets him free. And then, I mean, it's been a while, but I think the movie kind of ends right at that point
Yeah.
or very soon after. But it has this abrupt thing. But I feel like I remember watching that movie and that having so much more of like a heart wrenching effect on me, even if it was right at the end versus what happens at the end of Presence.
Yeah. I would say also, this is a bit of a tangent, but it does kind of fit in with what we're talking about right here. The other kind of major issue I felt like with Presence, and maybe you agree with me, I'm not sure, but does Tyler deserve this heroic moment? Because he's kind of the worst person ever.
He really is a dick. I mean, you could argue that, like, well, maybe he's trying to atone for that
Yeah.
in his final moments. He's dead. And I mean, if we assume that that is what's going on, then basically from the beginning of the movie, the presence is the Tyler who has already died. So he
Yeah.
can already look back and maybe even observe himself and see, man, I was such an
God damn
asshole
it. I suck.
when I was alive and I didn't, do enough to protect my sister from this guy. And so I'm going to try to make up for it in whatever manner I can as I'm watching it unfold again. And so in that sense it's him trying to make up for the bad behavior that he exhibited otherwise. But
Sure.
yeah, I mean, and that's part of the misdirection too, I think, is that he clearly from the beginning is such a jerk.
Yeah.
And then the friend comes in and he seems like he's kind of sensitive and nice at first to the sister before you realize what his actual intentions are. And so it's a bit of a misdirection there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like again, this movie is a fascinating experiment. And I love that Soderbergh will just decide to do something that he's never done before and that very few people have ever done before and just go for it. But as a story, it's not that great. And if
Mhm.
you presented this in a more straightforward manner, it would really not be much of anything.
Yeah, that's probably fair. But let's go to another piece. What do you got next?
All right. Well, I mean, while this sort of direct POV cinema is not something that's common, and in fact, I was looking up and I've seen almost no movies that actually adopt this particular perspective. Although there's weirdly another one that just came out fairly recently,
Hmm.
Nickel Boys, which I still also have
Y-
not seen.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the horror genre, what is really common is found footage movies, where the camera itself is not like literally representative of a character, but it's wielded by a character, and thus you see their perspective. And so the one that I picked was Paranormal Activity,
Yeah.
which not only, of course, has that found footage aspect, but also takes place entirely within this single house and this kind of modern looking house and is really about the dissolution of this relationship and about a terrible toxic man
Hmm.
who berates his wife, who is being haunted by a presence that he doesn't take seriously. And of course also the found footage style offers you the direct perspective of the character, mostly of that Micah character who's wielding the camera a lot. But another thing that Paranormal Activity does is it has all that surveillance footage
Hmm.
overnight where it's a sort of an omniscient perspective, but in a way, it's also the ghost perspective because they can kind of co-opt
Mm.
those cameras.
Sure.
So it's not the same, but I think there's a lot that this movie does borrow from Paranormal Activity and even its many, many inferior sequels.
I like some of the sequels, but yeah, I would say that's kind of my favorite, like found footage outside of Cloverfield, of course. But
Of course.
yeah, but that's my favorite one though, and I think that it like actually uses it for an effective reason, and it's actually really creepy and really well done. And yeah, I mean, as a piece here, I mean, the house is so important to everything, and I remember like while we were watching this movie, I went and saw it with Gina, and like 20 minutes in or so, she leaned over and she's like, "This house is amazing." And and like they really give you like everything of the house,
Right.
in
My
these
my
shots.
my my piece is 3D home tours on
Yeah,
Zillow.
sure. Yeah. That would work too. I think that's a good puzzle piece.
Yeah.
So I will go ahead. Okay, so you know what? Actually, before the reveal of what this boyfriend, love interest, slash psycho killer guy, Ryan, what he's up to and everything, didn't really know, what his whole, shtick was, what exactly he's trying to get here. And for a while, I was kind of thinking of him as well as the family dynamics of all of there's a lot of like repercussions from the friend having died, and there's some mental illness, some depression going on and stuff like that. I was thinking a lot about American Beauty, and I was thinking that this guy Ryan reminded me of like a Ricky Fitz type, and I was like, is this guy gonna end up getting the dad stoned at some point? Like, where is this going with this kid? But I feel like there's a lot of the family dynamic of a family kind of breaking apart, and focusing really heavily on the teenage characters and everything that they're going through, as everything else around them is also crumbling too. And I do think that there's a lot of that kind of 21st century American family thing going on here in this movie, until it like kind of focuses in on what actually is happening and why this movie is a ghost story and what kind of story they're trying to tell. But until that happens, I got a lot of that out of this.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, American Beauty has an early example of POV camera with the
Yeah.
character who uses the camcorder to film
Yep.
the beautiful plastic bag
Sure.
flitting across whatever. I mean, I think is we did this on Awesome Movie Year. It's the same year as the Blair Witch Project, is it not?
That's true. It was
So
99. Yep.
yeah, a real watershed moment there for characters using camcorders in
Uh,
1999.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think another frustrating thing is it is full of this movie presence is so full of red herrings,
Mm,
stuff like that. The friend who died, although the friend who died comes back, it's not actually a drug overdose, but the idea of a drug overdose, or the idea of the teenage daughter having this grief and trauma and maybe wanting, having drug issues herself, and especially the whole storyline with Lucy Liu's character, the mom, and is she engaged in some weird illegal activity at her job that
which really
never
went
gets
nowhere.
resolved at
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was a bit frustrating. Although, again, it's also, I think, going back to the in a violent nature thing, it's the idea that, like, we're just getting snippets of this. Maybe there's a whole plot about that. We just don't know about it because the presence isn't observing it.
Sure, sure, yeah. Ghosts aren't really that interested in human stuff, really. They just want to
Right.
scare us and kill us. But
That is
yeah.
true.
So let's go to another piece. What do you got next?
Well, I think this goes with a ghost story in this sort of more emotional, ethereal ghost perspective movie, and it's Osgood Perkins' "I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House," and another movie like this, like a ghost story, like Paranormal Activity, that takes place entirely within a house and is narrated by by a ghost when she's not yet a ghost. We start with Ruth Wilson as the main character, and almost the only person on screen for the vast majority of this film
Mhm.
who says that she's has died
Yeah,
basically, and she's now inhabiting this house forever, and we sort of go through that process. So it's also this anachronistic thing, the perspective of the ghost commenting on the events of her living self as it leads up to her becoming a ghost.
sure.
And so that's kind of in a way what we have. I mean, the presence doesn't speak, but it is showing us in a way and showing the audience the events of its life, assuming that we buy into that interpretation of the ending before ending up dead and thus becoming a ghost again. So,
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a good one to bring up here. Absolutely. And that, like you said, it goes right along with the ghost story. And I think, between those two and this here with Presence, I think we're getting into like a different, unique kind of way of trying to tell this kind of story. So I think that's
Yeah.
definitely a good one to include here. Um, I will go with Christopher Nolan's Interstellar for my next one. There is this whole thing of again with a lot of Christopher Nolan movies of does all of this work? I don't know for sure, but I think I know what he's trying to say here with everything, and with the various timelines and everything kind of converging on one another, and you kind of can't look at it in a fully linear kind of way. That's really how Interstellar is structured, and Matthew McConaughey, he was the bookshelf ghost thing. I don't know. I don't remember it, but whatever. The son was trying to help the daughter the whole time as the spirit because he's actually died and came back. And, the timelines are very tricky if you want them to be in a story like this. And that's something that Christopher Nolan loves to do. And that seems to be something that they really wanted to do here with Presence is tell a story that you kind of got to go along with it and kind of just buy into this kind of fantastical idea that they've kind of put together here. And if it works for you, it works really well.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely it's been a long time, but I think it's not a spectral presence, right? He's sort of like reaching across the cosmos
Sure, sure.
there to send a message of love to his child when she was younger or to the older version, I forget. But
Exactly. Yeah, it's
yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Right, right. Whereas this is just completely supernatural and we don't need any kind of cosmological explanation for it. But Soderbergh is, I mean, I hadn't thought of this, but Soderbergh's own film Solaris
Yeah.
is very much about that as well in a more science fictiony sense with George Clooney's character kind of communing with this alien recreation of his dead wife and allowing himself to find closure through this spectral presence. I mean, and that's a sci-fi movie, but it's a sci-fi movie where it's just like ghosts, right?
Sure.
I mean, we really don't. Soderbergh is not, I mean, in both cases, I think Soderbergh is not interested in having that medium character in Presence come in and explain, oh, here's exactly like the logistics of hauntings and why this is going on.
Right.
And in Solaris, he's equally uninterested in explaining like what exactly is the, scientific explanation for these presences
Yeah.
of, your loved ones that you've lost. And it's really just about the emotional connection that Clooney's character has to the wife who passed away and the regrets that he has and the closure that he needs to get. And I mean, I think whereas Nolan, even though on the one hand, as you say, you're just like, you got to go with it. You got to go with it in part because he's explaining it so much that you
Oh, he
just
sure
kind of
does.
tune out after a while. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the case in Interstellar, certainly in like Inception. There's like so many long winded like Leonardo DiCaprio saying, okay, so we do this and this layer. And then, and it's just like, whatever, it's a dream, dude, just
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And Soderbergh is certainly of the perspective that like, what matters is the vibe. What
Yeah.
matters is the emotional connection that I can create for the audience with these characters and what's happening to them. And that's the case in Presence, and that's the case in Solaris. So I didn't have that on my list, but I'm going to pick Solaris.
Yeah, yeah, throw it in there as an extra piece here, so
Yeah.
I like that. Well, since you threw Solaris in there, I'll go with another one that is, I think, a pretty obvious one to include here. Speaking of 1999, The Sixth Sense from M. Night Shyamalan. Uh, the tragedy of a ghost not knowing, why he's here. Again, this kind of goes back to a ghost story, and it is a big part of any kind of ghost story, really, is figuring out why you're a ghost and why you get to kind of do this, why you get to experience this and actually be aware of it. And in a way, because obviously, spoiler alert for The Sixth Sense, but we find out the big reveal in The Sixth Sense. For in this movie, it's almost like we and the character are all kind of figuring out a big reveal along the way, and it's definitely like an extra little layer on top of that. And well, of course, it's not as successful as The Sixth Sense. I think it's still an interesting little twist on the idea of finding out that big reveal in a ghost story like this.
Yeah, I mean, and I think in The Sixth Sense, you do have enough time to process it, and the characters have enough time to process it. So there's more emotional impact
Yeah,
of that reveal of Bruce Willis realizing what's going on and how can he understand that and how can we understand what it means for him that we
sure.
don't get in this movie. But again, that I doubt Soderbergh is interested in. I would be shocked if there was some like extra scenes where Tyler or the presence is sort of like understanding their role or whatever. He's not interested in that at all. I mean, I think what he's interested in mostly is the formal elements of it, and which is cool, which is
Yeah,
fine. Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm good with that.
Absolutely. Well, what's next for you?
So, I mean, I like, how many similar kinds of ghost stories are we going to bring up, haunted
Sure.
house stories? But I do want to bring up The Innocents, which is just an absolutely fantastic film that is an adaptation of The Turn of the Screw, which, I mean, another thing that we could probably bring up on here are various Mike Flanagan projects,
Sure.
and that was incorporated into his series, The Haunting of Bly Manor, which I actually have not seen that, although I've seen The Haunting of Hill House, which certainly has a lot in common here with Presence. But I'm going to pick The Innocents because it is a great, great film and has such an amazing performance from Deborah Kerr as this governess who comes in to take care of these two orphans and is experiencing what may or may not be a ghostly presence in the house. And it's just absolutely beautifully shot. I mean, if you talk about Presence as a movie that is really about cinematography in a
Mhm.
way, the cinematography in that movie is gorgeous, and it really is the way that it evokes the ghostly presence. I mean, it's not from the perspective of the ghost, but I feel like in any haunted house movie, being able to evoke an unseen presence in with your camera is essential, even if it's not the actual perspective of the ghost. And that movie just does that so well. And with the performances, and performance is less important here in Presence. I mean, half the time the performance is happening somewhere like off in the
The next
distance.
room, whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And the performances are fine, but that's not really what the movie's about. But you really get more emotionally invested, I think, in those main characters in The Innocents, and is just an absolutely gorgeous, amazing film. So I'm gonna pick that one.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I remember hearing so many great things about it, but I'm gonna have to check that one out. I saw an article the other day that was just like the entire article was about how much better Mike Flanagan's show is than Presence, and I was like, sure, I guess so, but
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to do a different kind of thing.
yeah,
And I mean, Flanagan, like to me, The Innocence is better than The Haunting of Hill House. And I mean, Flanagan is taking this story and drawing. I mean, Presence is like 85 minutes or something,
sure,
right? And Flanagan is drawing these stories out to 9 hours long, not always to their benefit, I think.
yeah,
Um, but he certainly is interested in really delving into, again, like what does it mean to be haunted kind of
sure,
thing. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, my last one, it's a little one, but I wanted to include it anyway. We are watching a ghost watch his own house get sold out from under him. So I had to go with Beetlejuice for a puzzle piece here. So, it fits in right well. And of course, we have Julia Fox as a realtor, which is such a random bit of casting. But yeah,
Yeah, Soderbergh loves picking up these weird, random, I wouldn't call her. She's not a non-actor. She's been in a number of
she's
things
been
at
in
this point,
stuff.
but
Yeah.
acting isn't really her main deal.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you saw the red carpet pictures, but she's got looks. That's
Yeah, I mean
yeah,
I feel like being on red carpets is the primary occupation that Julia Fox is in.
yeah.
Um, but I is the ghost, he's not, I mean, if we assume the presence is Tyler,
Hmm.
he's not watching the house be sold out from under him. He's watching his own family move into the house.
See, I don't know timelines. I can't figure this stuff out. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, but that is true. I mean, and Beetlejuice is also, because I think at the beginning of this movie, when you don't know, you might get the sense because it starts with the presence kind of swooping through the empty rooms and then
sure,
Julia Fox, the realtor, coming in. And you might assume, based on having seen a lot of these kinds of movies, oh, the ghost is going to terrorize this family that's moved into the house that it has a sort of like proprietary feeling over and try to get them to leave. And
sure.
that's not what happens, but it's reasonable to assume that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, what do you got? Do you got any more you want to bring up?
I mean, I was going to bring up The Haunting, which is another similar like classical haunted house movie that takes the characters' emotions and kind of projects them onto what's going on. And I think David Koepp, the screenwriter here, may have mentioned that in one of his maybe he even did a letterbox list of, influences on Presence. And I mean,
Mm,
another great classic based on that is based on Shirley Jackson's The Haunting, that was later interpreted by our friend Mike Flanagan,
yeah.
and a much more efficient telling of that story. Not that I mean, I like Mike Flanagan a lot. I like him better, I think, when he makes feature films, but yeah, a very good, but hitting all of the same kind of beats that we've already talked about here. But
Yeah.
if you're talking about classic haunted house movies and haunted house movies that are more about like emotion and character psychology than they're about like scaring you and jolting you, then that's
Sure.
a great one.
Yeah, and I think like to bring it back to the beginning where we're talking about in a violent nature and a ghost story, like if you want to tell one of these stories from the opposite point of view or from the opposite perspective or any of that, like you probably have watched a lot of these movies throughout the years and like, you know the classics and you want to kind of just see the other side of that.
Right, and I think it's hard, although there was one other I was gonna bring up that I haven't seen in so long that I don't know, but I was gonna say it's hard, I think, to make these movies scary when your main character is usually what would be the source of the scariness.
Sure, sure.
And the one I'll mention it anyway, but is The Others with Nicole Kidman, and I mean
Mhm.
that's is a big spoiler, but the whole idea there is they're being scared by noises and strange things that are going on in the house, and then the twist is that those are coming from humans and they are the ghosts. And
Yeah,
so I think that is sort of a way, but even then you have to structure it in the opposite way, where it seems like what's scary are ghosts and our main characters are people, and it's only through a twist that you can reverse that. But I think it would be hard to make something like In a Violent Nature where you were scared of the human characters on behalf of the like lurching, slasher guy with giant weapons. It just doesn't
sure.
really work that way.
Yeah, that would be very complicated to pull off. But yeah, I think we got a great list here. A lot of really interesting stuff. Any closing thoughts? Anything we didn't quite talk about you wanted to mention here?
I mean, I feel like I went through it all. I mean, the only closing thought would be, like I said, I was trying to look at straightforward POV movies and what have I seen, and there's really very few. But I mean, we could mention. I don't know if you've seen Nickel Boys, and I'm sure it's a very
I
different
have.
kind of story. I don't know if that fits here or not.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. When I saw Nickel Boys, like it's good, but at the same time, the perspective thing just I couldn't hang with it, and I really thought that was going to be a problem here. And now I'm wondering because I ended up liking this, and I didn't really love Nickel Boys. I'm wondering if maybe I would have gotten more invested in the theater. I watched Nickel Boys on a screener, and maybe in the theater it would have worked better for me. I don't know, but like, yeah, just sitting there on my couch and watching a first person movie was just kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm skeptical of that idea. And I mean, the thing in Presence that I think maybe helps is that whether or not the presence actually is Tyler, like it is unable to speak. It is does not have a corporeal form.
Mhm.
So I mean, I think to me a problem with a POV movie of a human character is like a movie to emotionally invest in a character, you need to see their face, you need to see their expressions, and if you can't, then that's tough. But if the POV character doesn't have expressions and doesn't speak, then maybe that works better. But I was thinking, I was like, maybe I'll try to watch. There's a famous like film noir called Lady of the Lake from the 40s that is a first person perspective of the like detective, and
Nice.
is a movie that is known mainly for being, I think, kind of a failed experiment, but seems like an interesting curiosity. But I did not get to watch that. But I did feel like that is such a key element of this movie that we should mention other examples of it.
If we do awesome movie year of whatever year that was from the 40s, I'm gonna pick that movie, Josh.
Okay,
Yeah,
sounds good. I will be happy to have an excuse to watch it.
there we go. Well, I think that does it for presents. Josh, is there another movie you watched recently you wanna recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I was going to recommend a very different kind of movie. It's a low key dramedy called Suze with Michaela Watkins, who I think is a super underrated actress, and it's a rare chance for her to get a lead role. And she plays this divorced mother who has kind of invested all of her emotions in her teenage daughter, who is really an ungrateful little shit in this film. And the daughter goes off to college and doesn't really want to talk to the mom anymore. And she's kind of lost as to what to do. And she ends up forming this weird bond with her daughter's ex-boyfriend, who has been dumped as the daughter has gone off to college. So they have this shared resentment of being abandoned. And he's this kind of like doofy himbo guy. And it's just a fun, low key. I mean, it has some serious elements to it. She like ends up taking care of him because he's attempted suicide. And so there's that dark undercurrent, but it's really just about like mismatched characters forming a friendship and figuring out how they can go forward in their lives now that this person that was so important to them has kind of abandoned them. And again, just Michaela Watkins is great and I think underrated. So it's on demand probably by the time this comes out, called Suze.
Right on. Yeah, I always like seeing Michaela Watkins and stuff, so I'll have to check that out for sure. Josh, what is going on with Awesome Movie Year? What else do you got going on?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Will we have started our new Awesome Movie Year season when this episode is released or not yet?
Quite honestly, I have no idea when this episode's coming out.
All right.
so-
Well, we have been doing our special 20th season, looking back at a whole bunch of different years that we've covered in the past. And maybe we will be on to our new season on the year 1941, although not the year of that POV movie, I don't think. But I love, movies from the 40s. So I'm excited about that season coming up. You can check out whatever we're doing at awesomemovieyear.com. You can get us wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on Facebook at Awesome Movie Year. And my stuff, some of the old stuff for me is at joshbellhateseverything.com. I'm at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook. I am at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd.
Right on. Well, Josh, as always, great having you back, and I look forward to talking again sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about presents. Thanks to Josh Bell for joining me on that one, and thank you to all of you for listening. If you're enjoying piecing it together, make sure you're subscribed. We've got so many episodes on the way, and if you are subscribed, you'll find out about them as soon as they come out. This one actually was up on the Patreon in advance, and so I'm going to also let you know that we do have a Patreon. They're produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, from Awesome Movie Year, Josh's podcast, and from my music career. Lots of great stuff over there. I think at the time this goes up, we'll have just posted another bonus Awesome Movie Year. And there's always advanced episodes of Piecing It Together, advanced episodes of Awesome Movie Year, and I am currently working on some stuff musically that will be hitting the Patreon very soon. So lots of great content over there. Check it out at patreon.com/bydavidrosen. Of course, I appreciate you all being out there just listening to the show, sending in your puzzle pieces, sharing the show, liking, commenting, all those things. But if you want to support the show, you can also do that by signing up for that Patreon. So let's close this out with a piece of music like I always do. And I gotta come up with something spooky for this one, because it is a spooky movie. I'm going to go with a track called A Closed Door, which was originally a piece from my 24 for 2024 series from last year, and is now a piece from my overall compilation album of all of this music, 40 tracks from the years 2018 to 2024, just everything that didn't quite fit on my regular albums in that time frame. So lots and lots of music, and this is definitely one of the darkest tracks throughout that collection of 40 songs. So let's go with A Closed Door, and I think this will be a good fit for this, and we will be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.